I'm so interested in what you do. Like I have like a million questions, but I won't kill you with them. I promise.
Oh, it's all good, man. Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm here for. Answer your
And
questions.
if you wanted to make a cocktail, you can make a cocktail. The whole thing behind this is this is our digital speakeasy. And while everybody's out of work and sort of stuck at home and, you know, not really able to go out and do the social thing, we wanted to make a little place where people could hang out and just have conversations. Like if I had met you in a bar and I'd
Sure,
say,
yeah. Well, maybe I'll get a beer. Let me go.
there you go. Go get a beer. Go get a beer.
Yeah, I was gonna do this inside, but my roommates are watching something. I think they're watching Outlander.
Oh yeah. Oh, let me tell you what. You don't want that in the background.
No, exactly. And it's a nice day outside. So
yeah, it's nice. Yeah, grab a drink.
Now get me a beer here. Yeah.
What flavor beers do you have there?
Okay, so my where did my beer go?
Uh-oh, time to kill some roommates.
Do you have any IPAs on draft?
No. Did nobody are they warm? Nobody put one in there? I can drink it warm.
Oh, a warm one is scarcely a one.
Here's what I'm going to do since this is what I'm going to drink. Oh, there you go.
There you go. Perfect, because I was going to ask some questions about
that. You guys know about Honey Tree?
Yes. So I'm going to have you explain. Go ahead and talk a little bit about sort of how you got into this. And before you do, I also want you to know that we are a charitable organization, but this thing, the Digital Speakeasy, in which we're doing, and we're going to send this out probably later to Facebook and Instagram and post this, but we're also working with the charity World Central Kitchen. And
Okay.
what that does is it takes restaurants and bars and stuff that have open kitchens and people out of work, helping make meals for them and for people who are in need currently. So what's cool is we'll put up a link in here for World Central Kitchen, and there's one on our Facebook page as well. But if anybody who sees this, who knows you, who wants to see this, donates, it isn't just a donation. Our company will actually double that donation, and we're trying to get up to about $50,000 overall throughout this whole crisis. So it's really cool that, you know, something that we do, but we also give a lot back. But like I was saying, I wanted to know sort of how you got into it. Like, how long have you been doing it?
Okay, cool. So see, I gotta get my Honey Tree meadery glass too.
Yes, proper glass.
I represent the brand full on. Yeah, these are my people actually. So just a quick aside about Honey Tree Meadery. I've been working with them this last year to help expand their apiary.
Nice.
So
do they have the land with their own apiary, or do they kind of rent it out? Or
yeah, okay. So Honey Tree had a space in East Nashville that they were using that was that was there pretty close to the meadery, but we're trying to expand to have more hives. So we have a benefactor who is letting us use his land in Ashland City.
oh, nice.
So we could put hundreds of hives out there in Ashland City. But right now, we just have about a dozen hives, and we're going to be increasing that number over the year. So a lot of the swarms that I catch and bees that I remove go to Honey Tree's apiary, and then I also have some hives out here that I'll show you guys in a few minutes.
Oh, nice. So while you're making that, I am going to make a riff on a cocktail, the Bee's Knees. I'm sure you've probably been like, oh, what's that? I've seen it before, heard of it before. Well, that is a gin. Yeah. So that is a gin cocktail. So this one is actually called a Gold Rush, which I was like, oh, good. It's another Nashville tie-in. So this one is just made with whiskey. So I've got a honey simple syrup. I've got a good orange blossom honey. And that's just equal parts, like you're making any other simple syrup, equal parts honey, equal parts water. You warm it up. So you can actually use it in cocktails and it just doesn't get really thick and really crazy. But please go on about, so tell me a little bit about apiaries and how they work.
Okay, so apiary is just a fancy word for a bee yard, and an apiarist is a fancy word for a beekeeper. It comes from the Latin apis mellifera, which is the scientific name for honeybee.
Nice. Okay.
So an apiary is just a bee yard. It's where you keep your bees, and you can have. I would say once you have 2 hives, you have an apiary, because it's like if you just have 1 hive, that's just 1 hive.
Yeah. Then you've just got a backyard hive. Then it's just a little hobby.
Yeah, and I would encourage anyone that wants to get into beekeeping to try and do 2 hives, because chances are something can happen and you can lose one of your hives very easily, whether it's to disease or to pesticides or
and do they swarm sometimes and kind of go off if they're not finding what they need?
What a swarm is a swarm is when a hive gets so big that it maximizes all of its space.
Yeah.
Sources are coming in, that the bees make a decision to split. And that doesn't mean they leave the hive, that means that they split in half. So half of the hive goes with the old queen. They suck up as much honey as they can. They go with the old queen to a new location. And this usually happens in the spring and early summer, but it can happen all summer long. But here in Middle Tennessee, where we are, it generally stops happening around July. But I caught a swarm last week, so it does continue to happen. And the later in the season that you catch a swarm, the harder it is for that swarm to build up and survive for winter. So their whole goal is to gather as much nectar and pollen as they can during this plentiful season in the summer and store up for winter. So in the wintertime, they cluster together, their numbers reduce, and they do everything they can to survive, and they eat the honey that they've made. So with that in mind, it's kind of our job as beekeepers to not take too much honey, but we can take some honey from them. And if you're a new beekeeper, you don't get honey the first year that you keep the bees. You want them to build up, and then the second year, after they've made it through the winter, the second year is when you can get honey from those bees. So that's what a swarm is it's bees looking for a new home. And you'll see them sometimes a whole bunch of bees in the air, but then what they do is they land on a thing. They land on a wall or a branch or a post, and they come together.
I was in Knoxville one time, and I'm sitting at this Scottish style bar called Jig and Reel in downtown, in the old town Knoxville. And all of a sudden this woman comes in and she goes, "Oh God, I'm allergic to bees. Can somebody help me?" And we're all like, "Just come inside. You should be fine." And she goes, No. Come look at my car." And we go out to this parking lot, and literally there's like a little old Mazda sitting there, and we're like, "What?" But all of a sudden you look and you're like, "What is that, gnats?" Or when we got over there was a swarm that had landed in her wheel well.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, just within 30 minutes, I mean, Adam, there must have been 1,000 bees. I mean, it was
it's a swarm is usually about like 10 to 30,000 bees.
I mean, it was insane. But so does the queen sort of dictate where that goes?
In a sense, she does. Wherever she lands, the bees are going to land around her. But the truth of the matter is that the beehive is actually like a democracy. So what happens is once they land in a place, scout bees go to other locations and they try to find a suitable home. And that can be the hollow of a tree,
Yeah.
or oftentimes it's inside someone's wall. And that's where I come in. And what I do a lot is I get bees out of the walls of houses. They'll find a gap in the wall that's big enough. All it has to be is 8 millimeters. And that 8 millimeter gap is all it takes for bees to get in. And then they what they do is they actually survey the place. They find that there is enough space and ventilation inside the space in order for them to occupy it. So,
so can they
go ahead.
build just about anything? Can they, like, I mean, everything from wood to metal to...
Yeah, I've removed bees from plastic containers. I've removed them from like metal propane tanks, like big old propane tanks that a lot of people have still behind their houses, like out in rural areas. Inside the walls of houses, inside attic spaces. I've gotten them out of trees before. I've gotten them out of cardboard boxes. I had this one where a guy had a whole bunch of, he had like a storage shed and had a whole bunch of boxes with tarps over them. And the bees had built inside a box and then on the outside of the box into like the area where the tarp was covering. And it was really interesting because they had built around like a lot of these old like knickknacks and curios. And so like all this, there was like, the Fiesta ware?
Yes, yes.
Brightly colored, like
the old collectible, super bright ceramic stuff. Yeah.
Totally. There was honeycomb like binding all this Fiesta ware together.
And Adam, amazing. When you talk about these bees being attracted to like these human structures and like Fiesta ware and things, do you know if is there any particular reason why they're attracted? I mean, you mentioned ventilation and space, but is it like they're escaping natural predators if they're not out in the wild, or are they driven away from something where these human spaces, these kind of like not quite detritus, but like maybe underlooked or underutilized human spaces that might be relatively undisturbed or particularly good for them?
Yeah, I think so that's a big thing is it does need to be, it's generally a space where there's not a lot of traffic, and there needs to be a proper amount of ventilation, and generally they like to go up higher, but sometimes I'll get them out of water meters. So sometimes they'll go in the ground because it's cooler. It's cooler. It's an adequate space. But there is actually a mathematical equation for the space that bees like, and there are statistically some factors that bees go for. So you can set up a box that is the right size to make it more likely that the bees will go into it. Then you can also put an old comb, that like a frame that has comb that has been used on it, and you can put certain attractants, and you can put, one of those attractants is lemongrass oil.
Really?
Yes, lemongrass oil smells like the queen pheromone for home that she releases to say, this is home. So yeah, there's a combination of factors, but I definitely think that one of the big things is it being out of traffic. These spaces that the bees go to are generally places where there's not going to be a chance of them being disturbed.
Yeah.
And I actually have some boxes. I'll show you since we're on the topic of swarm catching. I've got a box that is the right size. This is a swarm catch box. And let's see. All right.
Tom, you need to actually follow him on Instagram, because watching him actually go through and catch these swarms. Do you actually have a wet dry vac hooked up to a hive box?
Yeah, I've got a vacuum that's connected to a box. Yeah.
So he'll go into people's attic space and literally vacuum them into a box from where they would like to be anyway. But it's crazy. It's insane.
Yeah. So
I watched the documentary Honeyland, so
Honeyland is good. It's kind of heartbreaking too. Like what that what I can't remember her name, but the lady that's in that, what she goes through with all that. But what she says is half for the bees, half for us.
yeah, I was gonna ask about that. Is that roughly your rule with them as well, or is that on the conservative side? Is that's where it should be about half?
I think that's a pretty good rule of thumb. And some beekeepers would say it is on the conservative side, but I think it's better to err on the side of giving the bees more than taking more from them, especially with all the obstacles that we have and trying to keep bees alive.
Yeah, definitely.
Let me show you this box real quick. Okay.
Yeah.
So this box is a certain size so that the bees will want to come into it. There is a opening right here, so the bees come in, and then inside the box is this cardboard with these spots for the frames to go in.
Mm-hmm.
And there is ventilation here, so you open up these vents so that the bees can have proper ventilation, and then you put the lid on top of it, and there are these straps that go around and strap it in place. And then I'll take a strap and I'll strap that up to a tree about 8 to 10 feet in the air.
Yeah.
That's about where they like to go.
Huh.
So above human height.
And you'll just put an old comb in those little grooves?
Yeah, I put old comb, and this one actually comes with an attractant called Swarm Commander. That's a brand name, and I think that the stuff that's in there is basically lemongrass oil.
Yeah.
You smell it and you can say, "Oh, that smells like lemongrass oil." And so I use, in fact, do I have any? Look, I probably have right here in my pocket.
Lemongrass, nice. Much easier to get a hold of, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, and it's less expensive than the name brand stuff. Yeah. And I've found it to be just as effective. I use it pretty regularly. It also keeps the bees calm. So you can use smoke to keep the bees calm. And what that does is that simulates a danger, which is like a forest fire. And the bees' instinct is to engorge themselves in honey in case they need to leave. So when they do that and they eat up a little bit of honey, it calms them down. It makes them focus on their hive instead of there being an outside agent coming into the hive. It also covers up the attack pheromone. So if I ever get stung, I'll pull the stinger out, which you want to do immediately, because a stinger has an involuntary muscle with a venom sac on it that continues to pump venom into your system if you get stung. So you want to pull that out immediately for that reason, but you also want to pull it out because it's also emitting a pheromone that is an alarm or attack pheromone.
Really?
other bees to go to. Yeah.
Wow.
So I'll spray a little bit of smoke on, or do a little puff of smoke, and it's usually not an issue.
So, so many questions. So, how often are you typically stung? Which I'm sure a lot of people ask.
Yeah, people ask me that all the time. It's not as often as you would think, because I'm even when I'm not wearing like my full suit. Like, we're gonna go over to the hives here in a second, and I'm not gonna put anything on because I'm not gonna open them up. I'm just gonna show you the outside of the hives.
Yeah.
When I generally get stung is when I take my gear off and I pick something up that has a bee on it, and it's generally by accident. It's not because the bees are pissed off at me, you know. That's generally when it happens. So I guess I get stung maybe like a couple times a week, but sometimes when I'm doing a bee removal, I'll end up getting more stings because even though you have all the suit on and the equipment, you're sweating and you're moving around, going up and down a ladder. Take my hood off to take a break, and then there'll just be like one bee that's like, you know, I don't like this anymore. And I mean, it's an invasive process to cut open a house, use a vacuum, cut the comb down, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, usually when I get stung is when I'm taking my gear off.
Yeah, I was almost imagining it would be like the bee, like you've taken everything off, you've done everything, and there's like a bee that just happens to be hanging on to something, and you're in your car, like driving home, and you're like, come on.
Yeah, that's when it happens a lot of times, is in my car, or like I'm putting equipment away and there's just one bee on the outside of it, and I reach my hand under there and like just end up smashing into the bee. Yeah, that's usually where it happens.
So how did you get into this?
Okay, so I grew up in Texas, and my family had a farm. It was my grandparents and my great grandfather for a while lived on the farm. And as I was growing up, there were bees on the farm. No one in our family kept the bees. They were kept there by another man, and he's a really nice guy who would, whenever he would come to check the hives, would let me tag along sometimes.
Yeah.
And so I watched it growing up, but that guy died whenever I moved back to Texas. I've lived between Texas and Tennessee a number of times, and I do music as well. I'm an audio engineer and musician, and so I'd been living in Nashville, and then I moved back to Texas and was living on the farm in my great grandfather's old place while my grandparents were still living there. And the gentleman that kept the bees had died, and his family had sold all of the hives except for two. And those two hives had stayed there without anyone tending to them for a while. And so I saw that there were still bees coming and going from them. And I said, well, there's honey in those hives. There's bees in those hives. I need to figure out what to do about that.
Yeah.
So I started doing research. I read a couple books. This was like early days of the internet, kind of. So there
you just have to find somebody old who's still around. You're like, I've got a question.
Yeah. So I researched a lot on websites and, you know, early blogs about beekeeping, and just engorged myself with information. And I had been doing that for about 6 months before I found someone who was a beekeeper to take me out to his hives and then go to those beehives on my family's property and harvest the honey from it.
Nice.
it's after, and then I did that. So that was my first year keeping bees, was doing a whole lot of research, a little bit of beekeeping. And then the next year I was like, well, I want to get more bees. So I figured out how to get more bees, and the different ways of getting bees are that you can catch a swarm, you can cut them out of a house, or you can buy bees, and you can buy a package of bees, or you can buy what they call a nucleus hive. So a package of bees is 3 pounds of bees in a cage, and those bees are in like a screened in cage, and they actually send it through the mail. So you can pick them up at the apiary, or you can get them through the mail. That's not my favorite way to get bees. Now that I'm doing this for a while.
Yeah.
It's a package is kind of like a false swarm, and in fact, like in Europe, that's what they call it. They don't call it bees; they call it a false swarm.
It's a fake swarm.
Yeah, exactly. And my experience with them has been that I've had less success with those than the other methods of acquiring bees. So I think that you can if that's the easiest way to get into bees. You got to order them in the winter because they generally sell out of them by springtime.
Really?
Yeah.
So is there like giant bee farms that like just put together these like people starting up their own apiaries, or?
Yeah. Basically, if you have an apiary, you can sell honey, of course.
Right.
You can move your bees around for pollination, a way to make money from it. And then another way is to sell the bees themselves. And that's actually what I want to do eventually, is sell bees. And you can sell the packages, or you can sell nukes. And this is how I prefer to acquire bees, and also how I will be selling bees whenever I start doing it. Okay. And so what a nuke is it's short for nucleus hive. So the nucleus, we know, is the center or the core of something. So a nucleus hive has 5 frames in it, and bees on all those frames, with a queen who is already laying and already being productive. So to me, that is the best way to get bees and the best way to sell bees, because you're actually ensuring to your client that these bees are already healthy. And so I just prefer to do it that way.
How do you get the bees
Sell a bigger hive. You can sell them once they're 10 frames or 20 frames, but generally it's harder to transport. And to me, it makes more sense to buy 2 nucleus hives than to buy 1 10-frame hive. That makes sense, because you're actually increasing your chances for success.
How do you get the bees to behave that specifically, to have a 1 functioning queen and 5 frames set up? Is that just how they would naturally?
That's what they do naturally.
Grow?
So if we're gonna start from like the beginning, that would be a swarm. A swarm has a bunch of bees with the queen in the center of it, and you put them into a box. If I were to come up to one of these trees out here and there was a swarm on a branch, I would shake them into a box, and I would put frames in that box, and they would immediately start building on those frames. And they would start foraging, going out, getting resources, nectar, pollen, bringing it back to the hive, making comb, making beeswax comb, and storing their pollen and their nectar in there. And the queen would begin laying eggs inside the comb as soon as it's built. And those eggs would mature and hatch into worker bees, and the process would continue.
Yeah, I guess I don't understand the queen role, because if you give up your queen, then is that not your whole colony, or is it that like
Okay,
one?
so a queen is a super bee. Okay, so every worker bee is a female bee. Any female egg could become a queen, but they have to be fed the right nutrients when they first hatch. So that those nutrients are actually called royal jelly, and some beekeepers actually harvest royal jelly, and you'll find it in a lot of beauty products because it's a very nutritious, highly concentrated substance. So a worker bee in their larval stage getting fed royal jelly will become a queen. And so a queen has active sexual organs, whereas a worker bee does not have active sexual organs. They exist, but they don't work. So this big super bee gets born, and what's really interesting is she actually hatches within 16 to 18 days, whereas it takes like 21 to 24 days for a worker bee to hatch. Not only do these nutrients cause her to be a larger, stronger, more effective bee, but they also make her develop faster. So queen gets hatched, let's say 16 days, and then what she has to do is she has to go on a mating flight in order to lay mated eggs. Mated eggs are all female. Unmated, unfertilized eggs are all male. Okay, so that's the way it works in most of the insect kingdom, but definitely in the apis. So the queen goes on a mating flight, and here's this gets really interesting here. She mates with like up to 40 drones on her mating flight. Each of those drones actually dies in the process because their sexual organ is like the bee's stinger. Male drones don't have a stinger. Instead, they got a penis, and it gets lodged inside the queen and then breaks off of their body, and they fall to the ground. So the queen on her nuptial flight leaves in her wake a bunch of dead penisless drones.
So mating flight / slaughterfest.
Yes, exactly. It's just an all-out orgy of death. I'm sure
My goodness,
your viewers will get a kick out of that one.
Mr. Evan, how'd your cocktail turn out?
Oh yeah, that's the good stuff. Oh, you muted yourself.
No,
No, am I muted? Okay. So this is a Partita tequila cocktail, and this one was called a tequila honeybee because I literally just put in the ingredients that I was using. I was like, I'm sure somebody's made a cocktail with this before. So this is añejo tequila, so it's really dark and it's really rich. And then I used blood orange citrus. So I squeezed blood oranges because they're nice and dry and almost have like a bitterness to them, but they're really rich. And then, of course, that honey simple. And then I actually had watermelon in my fridge. So I threw it in the chunks in the freezer. So there's watermelon ice cubes.
Ice cubes, yeah, nice.
Yeah, I was like, good seasonal stuff. So it's fantastic. And so all my honey, of course, has the comb in it. So I took the comb and I threw it in the fridge. So it got really cold. And I've been throwing the comb in there. And then at the end, eating the comb. And it is amazing.
That sounds wonderful.
So the comb, of course, is just beeswax, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So bees make a few different products. I mentioned the royal jelly that they make, which a lot of people don't know about it, but it's been used in cosmetic products and medicine for millennia. So they make royal jelly. They make the wax. They have wax glands on their body, and they secrete these flakes of wax. And then they actually use their body heat to form it. So
they like pull it off themselves and.
Yep. Yeah.
Huh.
So yeah, they produce their own building materials.
That's insane.
Of course, we all know about honey, and honey is made from pollen and nectar. It is ingested by the bees, and they combine it in their honey stomach, and then they regurgitate it. They put it into the combs, and they fan it to get it to the right moisture content, because the ideal amount is 17% moisture content. Once they reach that ideal amount, then that honey is it has an indefinite shelf life. So honey has been found in tombs.
Egyptian tombs, right?
Yeah, have you heard the story of when they found the honey, the first, like when these archaeologists found the honey and they were starting to taste it?
I read the story. It's unbelievable.
So the honey's crystallized, right? It's no longer liquid, it's a solid. But they're like, hey, this looks like honey. And so one of the archaeologists, I'm assuming probably like a young intern archaeologist.
Yeah.
Sticking their finger down in it and tastes it is like, because they're like, let the intern Gary do it, and so
if it's cursed, fine.
He takes some honey, he tastes it, and he's like, this is great. It's still edible. And then they start passing it around, and then someone notices that there's a hair in the honey. And they're all looking at each other, and they're like, this doesn't look like your hair. It doesn't look like my hair. Like, what is this? So they dig down into the honey, and it is the hair of a baby that was preserved in the honey.
Why God?
So the honey lasts forever, and it also it mummifies bodies. So
it's like a mosquito in the amber, I guess.
Yeah, totally. So if you ever go into an Egyptian tomb and you find a jar of honey, you want to be cautious. Like, it's edible, but there's probably going to be
so they're storing stuff in there.
Yeah, a mummified body inside that honey.
There's a head. There's a cat's head in there.
Yeah.
So one of the other things I was reading was the other styles of honey. So everybody knows just their BS honey that comes in a cute bear shape, which is probably not all right. Clover, alfalfa, orange, blueberry, buckwheat, chestnut, gyro, or... Now, does this just come from sort of terroir of kind of where they are and what they're close to?
Yeah, so that's really interesting that you mentioned the terroir, because I believe that honey actually has a more unique terroir than anything else, than even wine, or they say that pork has a terroir.
When you left, I was asking Adam about the different styles of honey, kind of sort of their terroir driven, but also there's a seasonality. Isn't there like a winter honey and like a spring honey?
Yeah, so honey is all based on whatever's blooming around and regionally what the bees can forage from. So, some of the most sought after honeys are Tupelo honey. Yeah. And to get Tupelo honey, you have to actually put your hives on boats and float them down into the river marshes.
Really?
There's like a 2 to 3 week window where you can do this. And so to get a specific varietal of honey, what you have to do is you have to make sure that all your the boxes, or what we call them in the lingo is the supers, make sure all your supers are free of any other type of honey. And then you can you take your hives to wherever they're going to collect, where the bees are going to forage. You get the honey from that window of time, and then you take them off. So another type of honey, so Tupelo is very sought after, and even to like get into the Tupelo honey game, like you've got to be really connected. Yeah, it's almost like
Is that like is that like Napa wine where you're like, oh, it's super expensive, it's hard to get into?
Yep, it really is. It really is. It's like not only do you have to have like the resources, you got to have yourself a barge that you can float down the Mississippi River and get into these spaces. And actually, you can also do it in Florida. There's those trees are also in Florida as well. But the people that do it are like, they're a really tight knit group.
Oh, I bet.
To get into that, it's just like, don't even bother. So other types of honey that are highly sought after are also Manuka honey in New Zealand and Australia.
Really?
And Manuka honey actually has the highest amount of antioxidants for any honey. It's very beneficial for you.
So what are they feeding on?
The Manuka tree. But interestingly enough, another honey that you can get that is like a fraction of the price of Manuka honey, but has almost as much antioxidants, is buckwheat honey. And if you're going to get it in the States,
yeah,
that's the way to go, is buckwheat honey.
So where can you find buckwheat honey? Because this isn't like a farmer's market, local kind of thing.
No,
right?
again, it's something that like there's a window that you can get it. And I do buckwheat honey because there's a lot of farmers around here that have buckwheat and alfalfa. And I'll guarantee you that my buckwheat honey is never going to be 100% buckwheat. It's going to have a lot of wildflowers in it, and probably a lot of alfalfa as well. But that stuff is just as beneficial for you.
Right.
But it's very dark and it crystallizes very easily. So like I'll harvest it in like late July, early August, and it generally takes until like winter for most honey to crystallize, but that buckwheat honey will crystallize by like October. It doesn't take long for it to crystallize at all.
So can you reconstitute it at all?
Yeah. All you have to do, if your honey ever crystallizes, you just heat up a pan of water, and then you put your honey jar into the water. You don't put it in the microwave because that's not good for it. And also, it kills the enzymes. It boils the honey essentially. So you want to get your water hot, but not boiling. And you can leave it on like a low simmer temperature and put your jar into it, or you can get it really hot and then take it off the eye and then put your jar into that. So you don't want to like keep the water really hot because that'll also damage the enzymes and the good stuff in the honey. You just want to get it up to about 95, under 100 degrees, in that window of 95 to 100 degrees to get it to liquefy again.
So the other thing I was wondering about is, I know you do a lot of work with Honey Tree, and do you work with any of the local breweries as well?
Yeah, I work for, I keep these hives that I actually have out here are 4 of them are for Yazoo.
Okay, that's what I thought. I was like, I thought you worked with Linus and the guys over there. So
Yeah, we've got a beer ABL, which is B in French, and we just did the second release of that this year. It's a saison
yeah,
that that is brewed with honey and has some very interesting complex flavors. If you're into sour beers, then
I was about to say their sour program is great. So
yeah, Embrace the Funk is really one of the best in the country, and I'm
yeah.
glad starting to get the recognition that they are. Brandon is a really like dedicated brewmaster, and he's spent his time researching, and he's been to Belgium and France, and been with a lot of those old programs
Yeah.
that been doing this brewing for a very long time. And
I'm glad that they've been brewing for a long time, but then also they got into doing some great sours. And if you've ever been to like the Funk Fest and all that, like they do some top-notch sours when you try them up against some of the European stuff, and it's like they've done the work.
absolutely, yeah. So here, in fact, since we're talking about the Yazoo hives, let me show you.
Yeah, let's see them.
So some of these are my hives, and some of these are Yazoo hives. One of these hives from Yazoo is kicking ass. It is like, you'll see how big it is when we get over here. So here we go. These
Wow.
hives right here
Yeah.
these are all rescues. Like all
Yeah.
of these are ones that I've taken out of houses this year.
That's
Okay?
amazing.
So yeah, all of those are from removals, and then these are the Yazoo hives right here.
So do you have to build the boxes yourselves, or do you order the boxes online?
So I assemble them. I don't
Yeah.
build them from scratch.
Okay.
You know, I get the stuff and I put it together. But look at this one right here. That one right there.
Yeah.
That one's going up. That one's
How high
doing
can
good.
they go?
I mean, as high as you can stack them and they don't fall over, but it all depends on how much productivity the bees are making. You know, so that one is being very productive, and then this one over here, that one's also doing pretty great. This one over here that's on the end, it swarmed at the beginning of the year, and so they had to they lost like half their numbers, and then they're building back up. But you can see, look at the front of these hives.
That's crazy. So they're okay being that close to one another as well?
Yeah, there's not a problem. They're just all doing their job. They know the look and the smell of their hive, and they go back to their hive. Yeah.
That's crazy. So how did you get involved with the honey tree guys?
Okay, so I had people telling me for like a year or more, they were like, there's this guy, Ross Wellbun, you need to meet him. You know, I kept running into people and they were like, you need to know Ross, you need to know Ross. Well, I tried to find him on social media.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist. So Ross doesn't have a Facebook, he doesn't have an Instagram. And then I saw that they were building this meadery, and I didn't know it was him. People had just told me like, you need to meet Ross, you need to meet Ross. And he was at this time he was working at Little Harpeth Brewing.
Yeah, he's with Quaz.
Yeah, and so he was over there, but then decided to leave Little Harpeth and start his own meadery. And I saw that they were building the place, and I was just like, I'm gonna go in there and check it out one day. So I was in East Nashville, and I saw that there were cars there, and so I just stopped in and I just knocked on the door, and I was like, hey, I know you guys are in the middle of building and you're not open, but I just want to say hi because I'm a beekeeper, and I think it's really cool that you're doing this because I make mead myself, and I'm into it. And And then the guy introduced me, and it was Ross. And it was like, oh, people have been telling me that I need to meet you. And then he's like, are you Adam, the bee guy? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, people have been telling me that I need to meet you. And I was like,
Nice.
that's great. And we became really good friends. When they opened up, I was there at the opening and have been a really big supporter since day one. They've been open for a year now.
Yeah.
And at the beginning of this year, Ross talked to me and he said, hey man, I just am too busy to keep all our bees. I need some help. And if you could help me out, I said, I would love to do that. You know, what else do you need help with?
Yeah, seriously.
So I've been helping them out with not just the bees, but also with some of the brewing. And we've been doing renovations on their back patio.
Oh, wow.
We built a pollinator garden out there, and there's a deck patio and a pergola that we just finished up, and we are going to be working on a greenhouse as well. I know you're hearing like all this stuff I do, and you're like, how do you even have time to
Seriously.
do all? Yeah, I don't know. I just get up in the morning and I start doing stuff, and then, you know, when the sun goes down, then I just crash and go to bed. And then
Done. So one of the last things, I won't keep you all night, I promise.
Good. Having a great time.
Other bees. So like wood boring bees, carpenter bees. Because people are like, oh, I hate those bees. I was like, I think bees are all bees and they're all helpful pollinators, and we need all the help we can get right now.
Man, that is some good truth. It is, and I'll show you. Look, I got a tattoo right here.
I saw.
That's a carpenter bee. I've also got like the bees here. Like that's a worker bee. That's a drone. And then
that's a queen. That's awesome.
What's that?
That's awesome. I love those.
But yeah, I got this carpenter bee because they're pollinators too, and a lot of people are, you know, they're hostile to them, and they in Middle Tennessee we have a ton of them, and people ask me all the time, like, how do I get rid of them? I say, well, okay, so you don't like them boring into your structure. What you need to do is you need to make a structure that's cool for them to bore into.
Yeah.
That's what we need to do, is we need to be building pollinator habitats for these native pollinators. When someone says save the bees, what that really means is all. It doesn't mean just honeybees. We know about honeybees because we have them domesticated. We use them culturally. We get a byproduct from them that most people love. Like if you ask, like, I would say probably like 1 out of every 100 people I meet are like, I don't like honey. You know, like the other 99% are like, honey, yeah, all day.
Yeah.
You know? And so that's why we recognize the honeybee as like the bee we need to save. And that's true. We do need to do everything we can. But here in the North American continent, the honeybee is not native.
No,
the honeybee will never be an endangered species on this continent. Just like biologically speaking, it will never be classified that way. So the bees that are endangered are bumblebees, carpenter bees, leafcutter bees, mason bees.
Yeah.
And those bees are all beneficial pollinators for different reasons, because they have different size bodies, and they also have different they've got the different seasonal patterns, right? So like the mason bee is going to be I always get it mixed up, but leafcutter and mason bees, they leafcutters, I think, are spring and mason bees are summer.
Yeah.
So, or it's the other way around. I can't remember right now. I've been.
I'm not gonna Google it and test you on this one. Don't
Yeah,
worry.
yeah. Google it. Come on, you guys all have a Google in your pocket, so you can.
Yeah, right.
But anyway, but we need diverse pollination. Bats
Right.
are pollinators. Hummingbirds, moths, butterflies. All of these creatures are necessary for our ecosystem to survive, not just to survive, but to thrive and to be
Right,
diverse.
yeah. I mean, if people want to keep having food, they need pollinators. If they want
Absolutely.
fruits, if they want vegetables, if they want all those things, they need pollinators.
Yeah. And
So-
even if you don't eat vegetables yourself, the whole ecosystem collapses without pollinators.
Right.
So
What
you
can
can be
people
100%
do?
carnivore, and eventually your meat's going to go away
I was about to say.
if the whole ecosystem collapses. I mean, that's where we're at right now.
And people need to understand that. I'm like, it isn't about bees and just like being able to have like fruits. Like, no, everything. This is the pyramid. They make the entire bottom level thrive.
That's right. Yep.
So what can people do to help pollinators?
So the easiest thing that you can do is if you have a lawn, don't mow it for as long as you can. Let it go. Also, don't treat your lawn. Let your lawn be diverse. Let there be clover. Let there be dandelions. You know, we got sold all this stuff like the weed and feed and everything. And, you know, there's been a huge die out of lightning bugs.
I saw that. I was talking to somebody the other day. They're up in New Hampshire, out in the country, and like, oh, just fields of lightning bugs. I was like, I haven't seen those since I was a kid.
Yeah, it's and that's because of all of the stuff that we put on our yards.
Yeah.
So your yard, if you have a yard, is the first place. And honestly, neglecting your yard is the easiest thing you can do. And so I don't mean let your weeds grow up like knee high. I mean,
Right.
let your yard be like, instead of like 1.5 or 2 inches, like let it grow to 3 or 4 inches.
Yeah.
Let go 2 weeks in between mowing instead of mowing it every week. Okay.
Right. You're not playing soccer on it. You're fine. Just let it go.
Yeah, absolutely. The next thing that you can do, so like that is a pretty passive thing. The next thing you can do is by actually planting some things that benefit pollinators. There's milkweed, there's butterfly bush, there's Russian sage, there's catmint, all the mints, wintergreen, spearmint, peppermint. There you go, buddy. And if you're a bartender, then you're going to be growing mint and sage and rosemary and like all that,
and dill and
all that stuff. Having a thriving herb garden is good for pollinators as well. Yeah. And I would say like milkweed is a big one for all pollinators as well. And once you get milkweed established, it makes this really pretty pink flower. And I know people call it a weed, you know, it's milkweed, but it is. But that is actually one of the only places that some species of butterfly, specifically the monarch butterfly, will lay their eggs.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah.
You know what's crazy is I've grown French lavender in this big container, and it takes a lot of heat and a lot of sun, but if you have a spot that can get a lot of it, it is like bumblebees love it. And like I went over to Cheekwood the other day, and they have giant lavender plants. I mean, it was covered in bumblebees. So that must be something for them.
Absolutely, lavender is a very good one. You know, just any like if it's an herb that smells good and flowers, chances are it's good for them too, because it's good for us too. It's medicine. Yeah. You know, it's part of like a whole system of health.
I love it. I love it. Well, it's good for people to know that, you know, it's like the little things that they do that they think are pretty, or they think they'll use in a recipe or something one day or something. It's like all the other days, it's helping everybody outside.
That's right, man. Yeah, and so like we've grown up, evolved around bees, and so what's good for, and this is actually you know who Marcus Aurelius is?
The Roman, yeah.
Yeah. Marcus Aurelius said, what's good for the bee is good for the beehive. And what's good for the beehive is good for us.
It's true. It's hand in hand.
He said that like 2,000 years ago, man.
I was about to say, I was like, he knew it back then, which is pretty sad that we haven't taken it in already by now.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's awesome, man. Thank you so much for coming on and hanging out with me. And I will come down to, are you down at Honey Tree a bunch or just?
I'm down at Honey Tree a bunch. I'm going to be there tomorrow because I've got that bee removal that I looked at today. The guy said, you know, we had a big long talk, and then he was like, all right, we'll get started next week. So I'm not going to start till next week. So I'll be at Honey Tree tomorrow working on the greenhouse. We're working on the greenhouse tomorrow.
Nice. I will stop over tomorrow and say hi to you.
That'd be great, man. Yeah, and I'll bring some honey for you.
Awesome. Please do. Yes. I will totally buy some money from you.
Sweet.
All right, man. Have a great night. Thank you so much for coming, dude. I love this. This is super informative. Like I could go on till the sun goes down, but yeah, I will stop in and see you.
Cool. Thanks, Evan. You're the bee's knees.
All right. Thank you, brother. Have a good night.
Thanks, Adam.